This is the Dr. Duke Show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show. I am Dr. Duke, and I'm joined today by Alex Newman. Alex, how are you today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Duke.
Good to see you. Well, I think we have more evidence and more alarming evidence that public schools in America today, particularly our big cities, is really is nothing more than one great big scam. I mean, you know, every election that rolls around, there are these referendums, right, on the ballot for your local communities. They want millions more from you for the public schools. And Americans being naive but good-hearted people, they very often vote for these referenda. And what they don't realize, Alex, is that none of this money goes to education. None of this. Not one penny of this money that you keep handing over to them, on top of what your state legislatures and the federal government are giving them. Not one penny of this referendum money actually goes to making your kids read, write, do math better. It's all about building projects and athletics and teacher perks. It's stunning when you think about it. And so we start with Chicago here, Alex. And I want to just show you what you're getting for all this money, because this blew me away when I came across these statistics. So in Chicago, public schools in Chicago, we got to stipulate first. 89%, Alex, 89%, almost 9 out of 10 kids in Chicago public schools are minority kids. They are Black and Hispanic. That's stunning. So Black students from grades 3 to 8, this is vis-a-vis their own levels. They're behind, right? So the reading scores in Chicago are 11%. That means only 11% of 3rd to 8th graders can read on grade level, and only 6% in math. For Hispanics, the number for reading is 17 and math 11. In 22 Chicago schools, Alex, not a single student is proficient in reading, not one. And in 33 schools, not a single student is proficient in math. Meanwhile, we've got 50% chronic absenteeism among low-income students, which is most of the minority kids. How does this even happen?
Well, you hit the nail on the head right at the start, Duke. This is a scam in the most literal sense. This is a criminal fraud, and everybody would understand this if this was any industry other than so-called public education. And I mean any other industry. If it was a fast food chain, if it was a cleaning business, if it was a car manufacturer, if it was a pillow manufacturer, any other business, when you had a fraction of the so-called customers, I mean, like you gave the numbers, who could actually receive the goods and services that they paid for. In this case, learning how to read, write, do math. You'd have the SWAT team kicking in the door before the sun came up, and they'd be hauling these people off to jail. You're telling me you're spending $26,000 per year per child, and yet virtually none of them can read, write, or do math. And yet then you have the nerve to say, give us more money. I mean, imagine if this was just, say, a restaurant, and less than 1 in 10 of the people who ordered a meal actually got a meal. A lot of them got decomposing rodents. A lot of them got plates full of cockroaches. You would be so outraged, you would literally have the SWAT team there in the morning with the health inspectors. They'd have a big press conference about how these evil fraudsters were serving decomposing rodents instead of cheeseburgers like was advertised. And yet with the public school system, somehow people say, oh, well, maybe we should give them more money. It's the most insane case of Stockholm Syndrome I've ever seen. This is a criminal fraud, and honestly, I believe all the ringleaders of this criminal fraud belong in jail. It's actually one of the points that we made, Duke, in 2014 in the book Crimes of the Educators. These are actual crimes. This is an actual criminal fraud that everybody would recognize in any other industry, and all those numbers that you just gave prove the fact that it's a fraud.
Well, I'll bet you in Stockholm they do read better than they do in
of
Chicago.
Course.
Of
course.
And I mentioned the 50% chronic absenteeism among low-income students. These kids aren't even going, and Chicago doesn't seem to care about that. There is no programs in place to address the problem, because you can't look. And I asked the rhetorical question, are these kids actually worse off for not going? I kind of doubt it. You can't get dumber than they're getting in the public schools. Now, I'm surprised. You will not be surprised by the following statistic. Did you know that graduation rates for these same kids are 83%? These kids are graduating at an 83% clip, and they can't read, and they can't write, and they can't do math. So, social promotion. This, now you understand. Now we understand collectively, right? What critical race theory is designed to do is exactly this: not teach kids anything, but make damn sure that brown and black skinned kids get the same perks and accolades and diplomas and college tickets that everybody else gets, even if they can't do the work.
Yeah. It's so very true. And you know what you said there, Duke, I think a lot of people probably thought it was like a joke, but I think you're actually exactly right. These kids are actually better off not going. It sounds strange to say, hey, these kids are better off playing hooky. They're better off going out to get into trouble than sitting in one of these government indoctrination centers where the teachers will tell them that they might have been born in the wrong body, that to be their true selves, they have to go have their body mutilated by quacks posing as doctors, that America is an evil country, that it is systemically oppressive and needs to be dismantled. I mean, these kids are better off doing nothing. These kids are better off playing video games. These kids are better off going to get into trouble than listening to this filthy propaganda that's being dispensed in the public schools. So, I guess there's a silver lining here.
Let me throw you another softball here. You want to take a guess, Alex? Even you, who are as cynical as I am about this, what do you think we spend on every Chicago inner city school kid? What does the state spend? You want to take a guess?
And I think it's over $26,000.
$26,500. That's more than double most cities spend on their kids. And what do you got for it? Nothing. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. 83% of those kids have graduated, Alex. This is the success story, right? So we're going to take a short break, and I want to show you more of Chicago's chutzpah right after the break. Chutzpah indeed, Alex. I used that word today in standing in alliance with the Israeli people. It's a lot of chutzpah about what's going on in Chicago. And what's going on in Chicago is not only are they undereducating kids aren't showing up for class, they're giving kids diplomas for doing nothing. They're 11% and 6% reading and math ability. All of that above. Notice the testicular fortitude of Chicago in our next story here. It's unbelievable. Chicago is now demanding $14 billion to renovate their schools, despite the fact that many of those schools have less than 50% students attending. So this is what I said in the first segment. I'm back here with Alex Newman on the Dr. Duke Show, and we're talking about in the first segment how the scores, the money spent, the absenteeism of the Chicago public schools are stunningly bad, and it is primarily minority kids who are suffering from that. Meanwhile, they have the guts to actually ask for this many billions of dollars to create the infrastructure, to improve it, to take schools that have less than 50% capacity. And we got a graphic on this, Mike, show that. See, the Chicago public schools want to spend $1 billion in capital funds on its 20 most empty, failing schools. It's like dragging the Titanic up from the bottom of the ocean and spending $50 billion to try to turn that hulk back into a usable boat. It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense at all, Duke. And I'm sure the people demanding this money know it. A lot of this is going to be eaten up by corruption. A lot of this will go to government contracts for somebody's brother-in-law, somebody's cousin, somebody's nephew. And really, what in the world do they need this money for, right? They're hemorrhaging children so rapidly. They're actually hemorrhaging taxpayers so rapidly. A lot of the big businesses are shutting down. Just saw just a few months ago, one of the big hedge funds that was based in Chicago just moved down to Miami. They're not going to have any victims left. They're not going to have anybody left to pay all this stuff. Anybody who loans the city of Chicago money is an absolute idiot. You're probably not going to get your money back. And mark my words, Duke, within the not too distant future here, The clowns in Chicago and the clowns at the Illinois state capitol are going to go begging hat in hand to the federal government and say, we need a bailout. We spent $14 billion, who knows what, on these dumb schools. We don't have any victims left to sit in them. We don't have anybody left to pay for them. And so now we need the people in Florida, the people in Wisconsin, the people in Oklahoma to pay for this madness. Again, I repeat what I started with. These people belong in jail. The talk of giving them more billions of dollars to steer to their friends and stuff in the pockets of union bosses is simply grotesque.
Well, as you said, clowns. Clowns on the left of me, jokers to the right, and all kinds of failed minority kids in the center. We got another chart to show you. It's unbelievable. 36% of Chicago public schools are half empty or worse. And 170 schools there. You see them in the box. It is unbelievable how many kids are actually attending. It's 0 to 10%. You got 3 schools, right? 3 schools that 0 to 10% are utilized. It's unbelievable. And the farther you go down that list, the more shocking it is. And so even if these kids were given a viable education, they're not. This would still be staggering. And note the straight face with which the administrators say, hey, we got to build these. It's like these empty Chinese cities, right? Where you've got a infrastructure for 2 million people. No one lives there, but they're there, right? It's the same thing here. These are Potemkin schools, Alex. They're here to pretend that we're educating kids, so you keep funneling money to these teachers' unions.
Yeah, and you know, when you drill down into the request, they want to build laboratories, they want to, special technology. You idiot! You can't even teach a kid to read. You can't teach a kid to write his name, and you want science laboratories? Give me a break. My wife and I have taught all of our children to read in a matter of a couple of months with a free resource we printed off from the internet, a PDF called Alpha Font. I mean, anybody can teach a child to read, and yet somehow these indoctrination centers, $26,000 a year, after 12 years, cannot teach these kids to read. And then they want to build science labs. Then they want more billions of dollars. It is just, you're just at a loss for words. I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't so deadly serious and there weren't so many children. And there's an added horror here to all of this, Duke. It's not just extorting taxpayers. It's not just hurting these kids. They are creating a ticking time bomb. And Dr. Sam Blumenfeld warned about this before I was even born. So what they're doing by dumbing down these huge segments of the American population, these are kids who literally can't read their high school diploma. These are kids who couldn't find their way out of a paper bag. And they're being told that this is all because of white supremacy. This is all because America is racist and oppressive. This is all because, pick your cause du jour. What's happening is they are creating a ticking time bomb. And then we act surprised when we see just this explosive rage in some of our cities that bursts into riots and police cars on fire and people being beaten mercilessly. Folks, they're doing this on purpose. Yeah, a lot of people are getting rich. Yeah, it's a giant fraud. But there's an even more sinister agenda here. This is going to come back to haunt our country like you can't imagine. If you live anywhere near Chicago, you probably want to find a better place to live.
Yeah, and in Illinois generally. And, I remember back when you and I were fighting Common Core 13 years ago, and I remember one of the teachers' union's bosses said, the purpose of the union is not to educate your kids. The purpose of the union is to enrich the teachers and the administrators. And that's exactly what this is. It is the ultimate grift, because every kid is theoretically required to go to school, these public schools, and no one's going and nobody cares, right? It demonstrates to me that you don't even care if kids come. You're going to build these cathedrals of nothingness, so the money keeps coming in, and the same people are going to benefit. It is unbelievable when you think about it. And we've got another story here. I mean, this is not just a Chicago problem. This is a national problem. ACT test scores dipped to the lowest level in more than 30 years. This is the most predictable thing in the world, outside of the fact that the media is going to shill for Hamas. I mean, there's nothing more predictably, obviously going to come down the road than this, and you can see the dip since 2018. It's interesting, boy, this Common Core era. All the numbers are going the wrong way, Alex. I'm not sure how you square that, Alex. What do you think?
Yeah, it's the deliberate dumbing down of our country, and this has been the case for a long time, Duke. The SATs are a really good example. We actually did an in-depth dive into the SATs. What happens with the SATs? A lot of people don't realize this. Parents think, oh well, I got a 1100 on my SAT, and my son got an 1100, so good. We're at the same. No. Every 10 years, they are doing what they call recentering, which is the politically correct way of saying dumbing down. Right, because what they realized is we're on a constant trend downward, and they had to conceal that. They had to make it hidden so that employers, et cetera, didn't catch on to this. Now, at this point, they're kind of coming out of the closet. I'm sure you saw Oregon now has completely done away with any requirement to know how to read, write, or do math to graduate. So at this point, they're coming out of the closet. But for a long time, they've been concealing this by dumbing down the test. They're doing the same thing with the proficiency tests, et cetera. They are hiding the magnitude of the dumbing down. And one of the best ways to understand the magnitude of this is just to go out and talk to people, ask them just basic questions, things that you would think everybody would know, and what you'll find is people don't know them. They want to blame COVID for this, the lack of so-called education during COVID. Did it cause a slight downward tick? Maybe, but the reality is this dumbing down is deliberate. It goes all the way back to John Dewey, if not earlier, back to Horace Mann, and it's strategic. It's part of a bigger plan to ultimately take down and fundamentally transform our country.
And don't forget the illegal immigrants coming across the border with kids who do not speak English. They are inundating our schools too. And heaven forbid, if you got a significant number of immigrant kids who don't speak English in the public schools, you are not going to teach the English kids. You're going to focus all your resources on trying to get those kids, in the name of equity, educated. So it's just going to get a lot worse. And, when you think about these, you mentioned the basically you alluded to the critical race theory. I mentioned it myself a little bit ago. The purpose of this critical race theory is to justify this behavior. Its purpose is to acknowledge that minority kids are going to have a harder time and oftentimes less interest and family support. So therefore, we have to make that the norm, because it's inequitable to allow other kids or even ambitious minority kids to get ahead. No, we got to keep everybody at the lowest common denominator. And so that's why the same left has been attacking the national. Remember, you and I remember clearly that Common Core was based around these tests. And all the ACTs and SATs, they were adjusted to measure Common Core, not actual education. So they were these national testing organizations whose job it was to reify and to underscore how wonderful our kids are doing, because now we're matching the test to the ignorance, not to the achievement. Right. And so having said that, now, 13 years after Common Core, now colleges are now saying across the board that we no longer want to take the SATs and the ACTs. We're not going to look at them because, tests discriminate against kids. Tests demonstrate that some kids are better and some are worse when it comes to reading and math. And we're not going to engage in that kind of systemic racism. And on top of all of that, we've got a short video to show you about just how crazy the situation is.
Adam Snoza is a numbers guy. Well, numbers, English, science, anything that appears on the ACT.
You do see a drop here.
That's why the president of Aim High Test Prep was not surprised by this number. ACT test scores nationwide are at a 30-year low.
The pandemic and learning loss that happened was severe.
He says there are learning gaps from when students were online or out sick, but he believes there is merit in working a little extra hard to fill them in.
There's just a lot of holes in their knowledge that requires a lot of digging to find, and then someone to walk them through it.
That's part of the problem, he says, along with the fact that many schools don't require the test anymore, so students may not take it as seriously or take it at all.
Even though they could get a score that is strong, competitive, and help bring up averages, but they see it as a non-starter.
I think it's a good thing, because I think it's good that we're looking at other criteria and we've become critical of this test.
But some students may need to take the ACT to qualify for scholarships. So as part of the solution to make the financial aid system more equitable, UNO Vice Chancellor Rich Klein says a third to a half of the money that would historically go to students based on their ACT scores will, in fall 2024, be diverted to students based on financial need.
It is really trying to align the resources that we have to help the most students actually achieve those dreams that they might have.
Achieve your dreams, giving scholarships to kids who are illiterate. That's fulfilling a dream. The word equitable, the reporter said. And even that clown show guy who's pointing out the dip, oh, this is COVID. This is okay, so yeah, the virus destroyed the public schools. Unfreaking believable.
It really, really is, Duke. Now, there are a few bright spots in all this. Here in Florida, we just recently adopted the classical learning test as one of the possible standardized tests that students can take. So that's really encouraging. So there's at least one test that hasn't been aligned to the dumbed-down, woke, Common Core. And, there are serious efforts in our state to at least hold the line, right? But I know that's not the case in most of the country, and that's very unfortunate. But I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, Duke, about the illegal immigrants. And it actually fits in perfectly with what we started the show discussing. I believe one of the many reasons for the wide open southern border is that the teachers' unions want a wide open southern border. In fact, they need a wide open southern border. You know why? Because regular Americans are fleeing the government schools by the millions. In virtually every state, that means the funding of the government indoctrination centers masquerading as schools is going to dry up. As long as they can get more illegals in there, as long as they can get more victims, just warm butts in the seat to get the funding, the money will keep flowing, the teachers' unions will keep getting paid, the contractors will keep getting paid. This whole $1 trillion a year scam, this whole $1 trillion a year fraud can continue operating as the wheels fall off of the country. So this is all related, right? All these different things that we see, and I don't think that's the only reason they have the southern border wide open. I think this is part of a broader effort to destroy the country. But the teachers' unions need these children in those seats. Otherwise, the funding dries up. Otherwise, they have to go out and do something useful for a living, and they can't stand the thought of that.
And it's not just the homeschool that is taking the kids away. We have a demographic issue in this country that also keeps the borders over, right? The chambers of commerce, right? The business or lobbies want more workers, cheap workers you can exploit. And they also want open borders because we're not having enough babies as Americans to replenish the culture. So you got to bring not just artificial workers in, but artificial children to occupy these seats in these public schools.
Yep, absolutely. And again, it's time to shut down this criminal fraud. It is time for all of the ringleaders of this fraud to go to jail. And, sometimes teachers get mad at me. They say, oh, Alex, you're criticizing. No, I'm not criticizing teachers per se, any more than saying that we need to shut down collective farms in the Soviet Union means we don't need farmers or stuff. It's ridiculous. But this criminal scam that is dumbing down and destroying our future generations must be shut down. It's a fraud, and it cannot continue any longer.
I got to go one step beyond what you just said, in the sense that if teachers, good teachers, quote unquote, are standing by and allowing this to happen and not speaking out, not defending their children, then they're the problem too. Look, you can't be a good teacher in a crappy school and keep your mouth shut anymore. You got to stand up. And we all have to take these kind of hits for the truth. And if we don't, we become part of the problem. It is that simple. So I would if I keep hearing there are a lot of great teachers out there who don't like this. Well, band together. If you all stand together, they can't fire you all. Meanwhile, until you do that, I'm just not buying it. And that's going to wrap up the show. If you enjoy the program, please subscribe to our podcast channel. Simply search out Dr. Duke Show on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow us on Rumble. Visit rumble.com/FreedomProject. For all of us here at the Dr. Duke Show and for Alex Newman, thanks, and we'll see you next time.